Whilst the Fallout set has not been released yet, over the weekend at MagicCon Chicago, we had a preview panel showing off cards from some of the upcoming sets. So in this video, I'm going to talk about Outlaws at Thunder Junction and Bloomburrow, not Bloomhaven, as I keep calling it. If you're looking to pick up a single product or sealed product, pre-order anything like I'm talking about in this video, you can go to coolstuffinc.com and use the code KENOBI at checkout, or the link in the description below. Get 5% off your order and get an Orc army token that depicts myself fighting back the forces of darkness with a dog underarm. If you want to hear about Modern Horizons 3, that's a bit more of an in-depth conversation. That'll be a separate video coming out later today or tomorrow. So Outlaws of Thunder Junction is the Cowboys set, and it's the return of Oko. This time we're getting Oko the Ringleader, a 4-mana planeswalker where even in his most basic art, you can't see his nipples. They're covering up his nipples. They're self-censoring nipples, and quite frankly, I'm disgusted.
We just have regular nipples.
Oko the Ringleader says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, Oko the Ringleader becomes a copy of up to one target creature you control until end of turn, except it has hexproof. It has 3 abilities. Uptick by 1 loyalty to draw 2 cards, and if you've committed a crime this turn, discard a card. Otherwise, discard 2 cards. -1, create a 3/3 green elk creature token, and -5, for each non-land permanent you control, create a token that's a copy of that permanent. So after Oko Thief of Crowns is one of the most broken cards ever printed, it looks like they've gone very easy and very reserved on how far they push the next Oko. He is coming back as the leader of the titular Outlaws of Thunder Junction, so he is a main character as such, and a kind of famous villain for how both good he was in the game and being a villain in a set before, but they've definitely took it easy. Like, original Oko was so much better than this. Now, don't forget, original Oko was missed in previous season by a lot of people. People didn't realize just quite how good it was. And I say some people, it was some, the other 50% of the audience on Reddit and Twitter, realized it was cracked immediately. I did a video where I went back and read the preview comments out loud. You can go find that video on my channel. So some people did see that Oko was broken. This one has been met with a very sort of like puzzled look to camera and a shrug from the majority of people, because it's quite a weird planeswalker. We've had planeswalkers that turn into creatures before, and they've been reasonable included in standard, things like the 5-mana red Sarkhan that became a dragon. So it easily could be a playable card in standard. As far as beyond standard, Pioneer, Modern, Legacy, and Commander, I don't see this card being that exciting. Duplicating other creatures you have in play is kind of fun, but like, you don't get the ETBs. He doesn't become a creature and then trigger its enter the battlefield effect. So you have to copy things that have static abilities to get any sort of brokenness out of them, or just big creatures that you control too. On the upside, when he does copy another creature like, I don't know, well, I was going to say Elish Norm, but he can't copy legendaries. They haven't gone that far to push him. So what's a good static effect ability? So for example, off the top of my head, this is not even remotely the most broken thing you can do with it, but if you were to copy a Wayward Swordtooth going to combat, on your second main phase, you'll be able to play another land, because you will get to play things in your second main phase to utilize the passive abilities of the creature you're copying. But when you're not copying ETBs, I don't think it's very exciting. His +1 draws you 2 cards and then either discards 1 or 2 cards. It's a charter course variant. The crime thing is interesting. It's not keyworded here with reminder text, or should I say it is keyworded here without reminder text. Forsyth has already mentioned that only the rares and mythics won't remind you of what a crime is, the commons and uncommons will. A crime is any ability that targets one of your opponent's things. So it's kind of like a flavorful keyword just for this set. I've seen some people complain this is just more complicated than it needs to be, but ultimately writing whenever you target, or if you've targeted an opponent's thing, is a lot of text to put on a card. So in a set where we are revolving around crime, criminals, and outlaws, I quite like a thematic and flavorful like keywording of the ability. I think this is pretty decent. Overall, he's reasonably easy to ultimate with only 2 tick ups needed. His ultimate is not an immediate win of the game, but it's reasonable. But to protect him, he's a -1, which is probably a good thing. If he upticked and made a 3/3 to protect him, to get him closer to that ultimate, you're probably in a bad spot for pushing his power level. This card just seems incredibly okay. And you know what? I'm okay with an okay Oko as opposed to a broco Oko. Say that 3 times when you're drunk. Next up, we have Tiny Bones the Pickpocket, another member of the posse, a 1-mana 1/1 mythic with Death Touch as a skeleton rogue. And whenever Tiny Bones the Pickpocket deals combat damage to a player, you may cast a target non-land permanent card from that player's graveyard, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. So I've seen a few people compare this to Ragavan as being a 1-mana creature that can generate you value, but I'll be honest, this is not a Ragavan. It's not even close. Just to be clear, Ragavan is an aggressively statted creature with 2 power, so it fits into both aggro decks and non-aggro decks. It generates you mana, it exiles cards on top of your player's library, so it messes with people's setups of brainstorms and similar. And the dash allows it to get value the turn it comes in, and dodge, sorcery, speed, removal. There's so much text on Ragavan that's relevant, I don't think Tiny Bones is remotely the same. On top of that, playing a turn 1 Tiny Bones and then hitting your opponent on turn 2 doesn't immediately generate you value because their graveyard probably has nothing in it, unless they stupidly played Mishra's Bauble when you've got a Tiny Bones on board. So ultimately it doesn't do a whole lot in the early game. That said, Ragavan gets a bit weaker in the late game because of the fact that they can be blocked and do nothing. Meanwhile, Tiny Bones can be blocked and do nothing, but the fact that it has Death Touch means it will trade up. It will kill something on the block. Although it being a 1/1 means it can be blocked by just a random human token lying around. So ultimately, I think Tiny Bones is an interesting card and can be a lot of fun in Commander if you can play it after a Wrath and Lightning Grooves it into somebody because it's a 1 mana spell, right? So you can then spend the rest of your mana on playing something out of someone's graveyard. Fun card. I will absolutely play this in my... I'm currently building Una Queen of Fame Mill, and I want to play a lot of cards that play other people's stuff in my Una deck. This will work for that. But I just don't think it's going to be a hugely competitive staple like Ragavan. I think that comparison is bad. Next up, we have Duelist of the Mind, a 2-mana rare that is an invitational card. So Nathan Stewart won the World Championship. It was World Championship 28, I think. Yeah, it's Roman numerals on the bottom that I could have read before saying I think, but now I look like a dum-dum. Either way, this is a card that he has submitted a design for, then was refined and then released in a later set. It's a flying, vigilant creature whose power on your turn is equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn. And whenever you commit a crime, so target your opponent's stuff with a card, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So in essence, this is a 0/3 that in your turn, if you draw cards off of a Brainstorm, for example, makes this a 3/3. If you double Brainstorm, it's now a 6/3. Furthermore, you could obviously Brainstorm and then cast it on a Holy Heat or a Lightning Bolt to get it to a 4/3. This is basically a Brainstorm beta. Is it going to be better than the conniving Ledger Shredder? Well, probably not, but you might play some sort of split. Ledger Shredder does improve this card by allowing you to draw and discard off of Connive as well. It being vigilant does allow it to block, but you'd obviously have to cast draw spells or draw cards in your opponent's turn in order to get some power on it to make it able to kill things it's blocking. I think it's a really sweet design, and I love seeing invitational cards, especially when they, as is the case with most of them, will try to look like the person who invented them. I think it's a good way to pay homage to the players that are doing well at Pro Tours and World Championships and similar. Although these don't come from Pro Tours, that's not my point. I think having some legacy about the competitive side of the game and cards designed by people in that space is really cool. I think this card's sick. Fibblethip Lost on the Range is a 3-mana 1/1 with Ward 2, and you may look at the top card of your library anytime. Yes, that's right, anytime is the new wording for that. It's a new bit of templating we're seeing here. The top card of your library has Plot, and its plot cost is equal to its mana cost, and you may plot non-land cards from the top of your library. We don't know what Plot is yet. This is a teaser for a new mechanic in the new set. So we've got Crime, and we've got Plotting. Now, here's my hot, spicy prediction that we can come back to in a month or so's time when we start seeing more from the set. I think Plot is going to work like Suspend. Rift Bolt has Suspend. It's where you pay a mana cost, put it into exile, take your counters down on it, and when the final count's taken off, you can cast it. You often get the cards for cheaper or have an effect whilst they're suspending down. The reason my theory is that it has Plot is that you plot by taking time to figure out how you're going to do a heist, right? So it takes time, it takes turns to do so. Or perhaps you have to deal combat damage to take the counters off instead. There might be a difference to how Suspend works, obviously. Or it could just be Suspend with upside. We saw Discover be Cascade with upside, so I'm seeing a lot of old mechanics coming back with power creep attached to them. The reason I'm theorizing it's like Suspend or a variant of Suspend is that we recently had a rules change to Suspend that says that when the final counter comes off, you don't have to cast the card. In the case of Rift Bolt, that means if your opponent is somehow hexproof or has protection from red, there's no creature in play, you don't now have to Rift Bolt your own face. Now, I get it, and it makes life a little bit easier in some ways, and it doesn't punish people for having things on Suspend and inopportune time. Another example is if you manage to suspend a Wrath like Farewell in the Doctor Who deck with David Tennant, you can choose not to Wrath the ball when it finally ticks off. I think it's a little bit hand-holdy. I prefer the fact that you'd have to juggle things in Suspend with like clock spinning and stuff. Yeah, I think that change was for an upcoming mechanic, and this seems like a clear shoe-in for being the Suspend with upside or adjacent version of Suspend. So bookmark this and tell me in a couple months if I was right. Besides that, Fibblethip Lost on the Range being a protecting itself 1/1 that gives you some card advantage off the top is a reasonable thing. How good is it? It's probably okay. If the plot cost is equal to the mana cost, you can probably plot a lot of 1-mana stuff. So maybe you can see a bit of play somewhere as a weird Future Sight Oracle of Moldiah style, Vizier of the Menagerie style card advantage engine. Hell to Pay is an X spell for red. It says it deals X damage to target creature, and you create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the excess damage dealt this way to that creature this way. I've just said this way twice. Cool, it's an expo that makes treasures. This is an inevitability that they were going to at some point make this card. I'm surprised it took them this long. Now, the art is super interesting because it depicts someone firing not guns, because don't forget there's going to be no guns in Thunder Junction because Magic doesn't have guns unless we're doing The Walking Dead or we're doing Warhammer or we're doing any other 100 IPs that'll have guns in them. But this is someone firing not guns. They're like magical hand blasters. The art is kind of sick and I do like it. How to pay, the one place that I want to cast it is targeting my own stuffy doll. I love doing expels into my own stuffy doll. Shoot the stuffy doll, transfer the damage to someone else and make a lot of treasures extra. That's pretty decent, right? Because you get the excess damage to the player anyway, and you also get the tap treasure tokens. Oh, spicy. And then lastly, from Thunder Junction, we have these 5 lands. They're full art that do some sort of negative space, like fiddly-fuddly with some terrain. It shows us the aesthetic of the setting, which is going to be Old West cactus upon ranges and waterfalls and similar, so it's pretty cool. Personally, I don't like it. I don't like the Theros lands, all these lands, the ones that look like Pokemon Energy, where they just stick the mana symbol high up there and hold it on a pedestal. Not a big fan. I prefer the less abstract and more concrete world building lands. Some of them are pretty. The island in particular does look like aesthetically pleasing to me. It makes me go, I'd like to swim in that deep blue water, but ultimately I feel like it looking like a Pokemon Energy is not what I want. So I'm glad these exist for somebody, but they're not for me. And then in Outlaws and Thunder Junction, we're also having these, the breaking news cards, the Prosperity Post. These are the front covers of newspapers, and the only one we've been shown so far is Thoughtseize. Well, that's not true. We've got Crime and Punishment as well. Crime and Punishment is in here mainly so they can point out that crime does do a crime by targeting a thing from an opponent's graveyard. I think it's targeting opponent, thing in graveyard, or thing in play for crimes. That's a cute way of doing it. This card is also, for some reason, over $5. I thought this was a bulk rare from Dissension, but I guess it's never been reprinted. So at the point this gets reprinted now, Crime and Punishment is going to be very, very cheap. Thoughtseize, though, is still a $10 card and it's cheapest printing, and Thoughtseize is great. I love me a Thoughtseize. It's very, very powerful, very, very push card from back in the day that still sees lots of play across many a format, Modern, Pioneer, and Legacy. To see another reprint is great, and I do like the thematics, like fitting of this frame into the world. I will say this, though. This and the Dossier frame from Mark of Mana do not depict that this is a black card. Of course, the art can do some heavy lifting there. The art does make it look like a black card, and I'm assuming each of the arts will be color coded in some way to do that. If you look at Crime and Punishment, there's a purpley color on the left and a greeny hue on the right. Either way, I do think seeing what color a card is via its frame more so than its art is important, and both this and the Dossier frames fail at that. So thematically, I like their inclusion, but they're not cards that I particularly like the frame themselves if I were to play with or against them. It's a small nitpick. I'm not going to bang a drum about it, but I do like it when cards are recognizable as their color from afar. So the 1-mana archetypal, the most famous 1-mana black spell of all time, Thoughtseize, looking like a white spell, I think is a bit of a fail from an art direction and aesthetic standpoint, and from game design too, honestly. On top of that, there'll be a slot in the boosters where you can open a big score card. So in essence, the Sword of Wealth and Power and the Nexus of Becoming are cards from the big score, which was going to be a Aftermath style epilogue booster set for the Outlaws at Thunder Junction. After Aftermath both bombed critically, and I think with consumers too, I don't think any fuckers bought those packs, Wizards have adjusted, and thus they've folded these in to be a special slot in a set. Now, I do like them adjusting and not doing another shitty product that costs you the same as a normal product with less stuff in it. However, this might even make the cards more expensive if there's just less of them floating around in the wild. Exactly how this will affect the card prices we don't know, but I have a feeling it'll make them more expensive than even the most sought after Nissas from Aftermath. For the record, Nissa Resurgent Animist from Aftermath is currently $17. She stabilized a lot lower than where she got to. She was at $40 at one point, but still quite expensive for a mythic, simply because nobody opened these packs. Back to the big scorecards. Sword of Wealth and Power is a 3-mana equipment that gives +2/+2 protection from instants and protection from sorceries. When a creature deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. In essence, this is the first in a probably long line of the cycle now of Swords of X and Y that don't reference colors. So Sword of Wealth and Power is a homage or a side pivot of a cycle from the swords of things like fire and ice. Originally, there were color protections, so in case of Sword of Fire and Ice, it was red and blue, and then you did things that were red and blue adjacent, damage and drawing cards. We completed that cycle recently. I think Wealth and Hearth? No. Hearth and Home was the last one? No. Foresight and Future? I don't know, and I don't care enough to check which one was the last one that came out. They've been a bit lackluster, but the sort of X and Y do see quite a bit of eternal play. Light and Shadow and Fire and Ice, for example, and War and Peace all see play across Legacy and Modern here and there. Wealth and Power being protection from instants and sorceries is a reasonably straightforward side pivot. A little bit, what's what I'm looking for? Uninspired, I'd say. The actual mechanic, so the copying spells makes perfect sense for sorceries. Why the protection from instants gives you a treasure, I do not know. It almost feels like they're like, well, we did something else during development, it was too good or it was boring, and we ran out of time, so we just slapped make a treasure on it, which is a thing we see a lot in card design at the moment that I think is boring, uninspired, and uninteresting. So ultimately, I think this sword is probably quite good. Going to combat, hitting somebody, and then double casting your brainstorm, swords to plowshares, go for the throats, or whatever like instant sorcery you've got afterwards. Yeah, no, it is instant sorcery. I had to check it wasn't only copying sorceries there. Hell, hitting someone and doubling a time walk or a time warp is probably the big one. I was just going for low cost spells that are regularly played in eternal formats, but doubling a time warp would be pretty legit. Either way, the card is reasonably powerful. I just think the design is kind of boring. Now, the next up becoming is a 6 mana, basically a do nothing, some would say, card. It's not true because modern designers got away from do nothings, but this is the kind of janky artifact that I'm going to slam in multiple commander decks. I love this stuff. 6 mana, beginning of combat on your turn, draw a card. Then you may exile an artifact or creature card from your hand. If you do, create a token that's a 3/3 golem artifact in type. So in essence, you play in first main phase with 6 mana, go to combat and draw a card. That's the absolute bare minimum this does. Well, the bare minimum is you cast it for 6 mana and before you go to combat, someone blows it up. That's the bare minimum. But drawing a card is drawing a card. Now, on top of that, you then get to exile an artifact or creature from your hand, make a copy of it, that's a 3/3 golem, and you get all its ETB triggers and similar. At a doubling season or anointed possession, you get 2 copies, and at a Bernard, your golem is now a 5/5 with trample. Ultimately, I'm putting this into Bernard. This card is great for Bernard. Love this for Bernard. I ultimately think this card might actually demand a price tag around $10 minimum, because it's going to be few and far between because it's a mythic extra slot in a different set. And beyond that, it's just the typical commander junk that people will love to play with. Drawing an extra card and making bodies free, or at least for the initial investment of 6 mana. This card is banging. I love it. I need multiple copies. And that's everything from Outlaws at Thunder Junctions. Let's talk about Bloomburrow. What did I call it at the beginning? Did I call it Bloomhaven? Either way, I keep calling it Bloomhaven. So Mabel, heir to the Crag Flame, is a 3 mana mouse soldier. So the important thing to know about Bloomhaven is that it's everything is an anthropomorphized little like human acting animal. There are no humans on the plane of Bloomburrow. And Mabel is like the hero of the story. They give other mice +1/+1, so mice is a creature type now. And when Mabel, heir to the Crag Flame, enters, key thing there is not enters the battlefield. I'll go back to that in a second. Create a Crag Flame, a legendary colorless equipment artifact token that equipped creature gets +1/+1, vigilance, trample, and haste. This is a strong card. It's a lord for other mice. Depends if there's good mice in this. It creates an artifact token, so even if this dies, you've still got the artifact lying around. The artifact gets +1/+1, vigilance, trample, and haste, which is kind of nuts. Making this a 5 mana 4/4 trampling, hasting, vigilant creature. Just think about that for a moment. But on top of all that, it shows us the future where we're going to be moving, enters the battlefield. So it's not mechanically changing how it works, but it is just changing how cards are templated in the future, which I quite like. As cards get wordier and wordier, they're going to have to find somewhere to cut words out, I guess. All of the arts for this are cute and are gorgeous. And yeah, Mabel just seems like a very reasonable 3 mana rare, if I'm honest, both for constructed play and for commander. We might even have red-white mice as a card type, as an archetype in standard or like pioneer. I think 3 blind mice also makes mice tokens, so this +3 blind mice is actually pretty good. Bearing in mind that 3 blind mice cannot copy the equipment because the equipment is legendary, so you won't get 2 copies of the token. So all the animals on Bloomburrow are going to be the same size as they would be in real life. So that means when you get to bears like Lumra, Bellow of the Woods, they're going to be bigger than everything else. And these are like the villainous, like monstrous creatures that are causing problems. This mythic has 3 wonderful arts. And something I do want to bring up is that the, not anime one, but the border extended one is by Mitsuhiro Erita, who is the original artist for the original base set of Pokemon's Fat Pikachu and Charizard, for example. It's quite exciting to see artists like this coming to Magic. Lumra is a vigilant, reaching 6 mana creature with power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. So far, so meh. And when it enters the battlefield, mill 4 cards, then turn all land cards from the graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, this is a solid 6 drop that doesn't seem very exciting if I'm honest. But actually, I guess it returns all lands, not just a lands mill. That's the important part of what makes this pretty good. So for example, in response to the trigger of Lumra, you can sack all of your lands to Zurin Orb to put them all in the bin and gain a bunch of life, and then Lumra puts them all back into play tapped. You obviously float that mana and then have any landfall triggers in play. I don't know, Tireless Provisioners, Lotus Cobras, whatever's in play, and boom, you now got a stew cooking as you get a million landfall triggers. So Lumra is pretty good if you have a sack outlet for your lands, or a way to put a lot of lands into your bin before you cast your Lumra. Life from the Loams, Scape Shifts, all that jazz. Then we have Brio Riptide Rogue, a 4-mana Otter Rogue who is adorable. They're surfing water like Iceman from the X-Men. They're a 3/3 with prowess. Other creatures you control have prowess. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. This guy is going to be a great aggro commander. I'm actually looking forward to perhaps playing him in Historic Brawl, where I can really get aggro with my opponents. But ultimately, just, yeah, a cool aggro commander that's going to upset some people when it beats one person down. That's a problem with aggro commanders, right? They upset people because you always have to target one person and beat them down. It's a problem with Voltron and just aggro in general. Bria is in there, but you can't be mad at Bria because Bria is an adorable little otter, and the set symbol for this set, being this like maple leaf thing, is gorgeous. This set's aesthetic is beautiful. Burke is a Long Ear of the Law, a 6-mana 4/4 rabbit soldier. It's vigilant. And when Burke, Long Ear of the Law, enters, put a +1/+1 counter to 2 target creatures. That includes your opponents if you want to. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter attacks, double the number of counters on it. Or +1/+1 counters on it, should I say. So he's a dude who buffs your dudes and then makes your dudes bigger. That's pretty good. That's pretty good from a let's make our things huge perspective. Ultimately, it's 6 mana. It's a little bit lackluster and it's a little bit unexciting for me, if I'm honest. The fact that he's got a club made out of like an iron carrot makes me like the character a lot. Long Ear of the Law is also a wonderful little like whimsical evocation of what this character is within the canon and the world of Bloomburrow, but mechanically I find the card a little bit boring. And then we were also shown these mountains, which show that there will be full art lands that depict each season within Bloomburrow, which I don't know if that is going to have some sort of, not mechanical as in there's a season changing mechanic, but I don't know if that plays into the lore at all or the story. I would love to see different seasonal, like the same legend but with different seasonal art. But on that point, then would have like manga art, showcase frame, 4 seasons. At that point, my eyes start to cross over and my bumhole starts to leak. And that's all the cards, but I do want to cover something about the art. First up, there's Hugs, this huge badger barbarian. I don't know what colors it's in. I'm going to guess green-black from the color palette around it. And he's crushing the skulls of some sort of skeleton rat. And he just looks gnarly. This character is awesome. I don't love badgers. I once got growled at a badger on a walk home from college once. So, you know, me and badgers don't have a good relationship, but I just think badgers are cool. This badger is cool. And then we've got Glob, Calamity's Augur, this frog wizard, green-blue, right, from color palette, guessing, with some sort of like watery sword. I like frogs too. What can I say? I just think animals are cool. Badgers and animals and frogs and stuff. This set is adorable. This guy has also got he has piqued my interest. There's also a rat and a bat and a lizard that are less interesting. As you can see them here, the group. It's like Mabel's ensemble of like heroes. Is this the Bloom Watch? The Gate Burrow? I don't know what term we're using, but Archer Rabbit, Gecko Cleric, Brute Badger, Wizardy Frog, Sorcerer Bat, and Mabel. Glowing Soul Calibur-esque sword. It's a cool set. Very cool set. And then, on top of all that, we're going to have a special slot where we get anthropomorphized versions of the planeswalkers that we all love. Well, they showed off Jace. Here's Jace as a fox, which I'm sure the furry community are just absolutely lapping up. This is them appealing to the furries, so they can lap that up. And then there's also Val Zarek as an otter, which is probably a joke about body types that I'm not going to make. But we all know what I'm thinking. But these are awesome. I want to see more of these. What I would love to see with these is not just planeswalkers. I'd love to see other like characters that people care about. I want to see Elish Norn as a badger. I want to see Jin Kataxis as an oct. Niv Mizzet as a dog. Do you know what I mean? Like, give us non-planeswalker characters. Look, I love planeswalkers as much as the next person. It depends who you ask, actually. Some people don't like planeswalkers. But I would love to see other famous characters. I want Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and I want it to be a fox. Do I want it to be a fox? Dashend. If you did a Dashend Thalia, I would lose my mind. I genuinely think I might have to be like locked in a room on my own for a while just to like bounce off the walls with excitement and glee. And that's not a sexual thing, by the way. Just want to clarify that. I just love Thalia as a card, as a character, and I love Daxons. And Thalia would just be And it kind of works, right? Dachshunds are Germanic in origin, with badger dog being the translation of Dachshund or whatever the German for it is. And Thalia comes from like the European Germanic horror set of Innistrad. It's not a million miles apart, okay? Give me Dash and Thalia. Anyway, that summarizes up Bloomburrow and Outlaws at Thunder Junction. Both sets are looking... they're looking tasty. Look, I know it's a lot of previews, and I absolutely guarantee you that people are going to comment with frustration on this, and I absolutely hear you. It was frustrating on Friday, when I finished work to sort out the weekend with a kid's birthday party for my daughter who's just turned 1 and similar, and they revealed a load of stuff, and I was like, I should make videos on this, but I don't have the time. And like, people were dropping Fallout spoilers still. Like, it's cool to have new stuff, and all of this stuff does look exciting. It's just a lot all of the time. I'd rather have a lot all of the time than nothing, though. Think about people in the Pokemon space. Pokemon enjoyers and Pokemon creators. There's not a Pokemon game quite regular, like for like years at a time, right? So that's how I'm rationalizing it, although it can burn you out a little bit. Either way, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Ta-ta for now.